just stop. Here's Ross, the host with today's dose of common sense.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. And yeah, it's been a few days. Been through a lot of sickness stuff and just really couldn't sit down and concentrate and do this. There are so many things going on in the world right now that it's really hard to focus in on one or two things. I mean, it's insane. The beginnings of the Trump administration, all the chaos that's happening in Washington, D.C., where they're gutting entire departments and firing people by the thousands and then having to rehire some of them because they shouldn't have fired them in the first place. And it's just complete and utter chaos. And how the world is viewing what's going on here in the United States is kind of really sad. Not on their part. It's just sad that the rest of the world has to look at us the way they are right now because, yeah, it's not pretty. They think we're all a bunch of idiots, to be honest with you. But I saw a few things going on this week that I thought would be fun. We've talked about Bob Lazar, maybe. Anyway, we've talked about Rogan before. And Joe Rogan has a thing for Bob Lazar, like a complete thing for him. He's had George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, and Corbell wound up introducing him to Bob Lazar, I guess. And so Lazar came on his program, and it was like 2 hours and 45 minutes that they talked and all this stuff. And Joe is just completely smitten by the whole story. He's been promoting this Bob Lazar thing for a couple of years now. I don't remember. It might have been longer than a couple of years ago now. I'm losing track. But every time somebody comes on and they start talking about anything, a little bit of woo or maybe a little UFO or UAP stuff going on, he starts talking about Bob Lazar. And he is just all in on Bob Lazar. And then sometimes, a few minutes in, he'll say, well, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt because you don't know if the guy's bullshitting, you don't know if he's lying, you don't know any of that stuff. But then he starts excitedly telling you all about the Bob Lazar story because he's all in on this thing. And the other day, or might have been yesterday, I don't even know when, he had Woody Harrelson on, and he starts telling Woody Harrelson about Bob Lazar. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to bring up a few things about Bob Lazar and talk about them, and kind of stop him from talking occasionally and just, interject a few things. Now, to Harrelson's credit, he doesn't really say a whole lot about this. He's just sort of listening at this point, but I don't know if he's a believer or not. I don't think I've ever sat through an actual interview with Woody Harrelson that's been recorded on any topic, so I don't know if he's one of those, if he's a UFO believer or an alien spaceship guy. But I guess I can go back and watch this podcast of Joe Rogan's and figure that out. But here we are on the screen share for those of you who are watching on YouTube. For those of you who are not, I've pulled up X, formerly known as Twitter, and I have a few people that I follow and share some of their stuff. Red Panda Koala is one of them, and he covered this Joe Rogan situation with Woody Harrelson talking about Bob Lazar. So it makes it very convenient. He clipped this himself and posted it on X. So now it gives us the opportunity to listen.
Bob Lazar is the guy that in 1989, he did an interview with George Knapp in Las Vegas, and he said he was working back engineering UFOs for the government. And he has this crazy fucking story about working at Area S4, Site 4, and Area 51 in the Nevada desert. Was at that point in time, the government would deny that Area 51 even existed. And he's like, no, I work out there, and I was working back engineering propulsion systems from crashed UFOs. And he was explaining how these things work and explaining how it's some sort of a gravity propulsion device that works completely different than any propulsion device that we've ever devised.
Now, Bob Lazar's story over the years, contrary to what Rogan says, Rogan's constantly saying, and Jeremy Corbell likes to say the same thing, that his story hasn't changed at all in 30 years. Yes, it has. It has pretty dramatically and in multiple ways. But one of the things I've always been intrigued about is they couldn't make these things work. That's why they were bringing in these random quote-unquote physicists, because Lazar is not a physicist. He does not have an advanced degree. He was not a physicist. He wasn't a scientist at all. He didn't work for them as a scientist. He was a subcontractor. We'll talk about that in a minute, because Jeremy Corbell and a bunch of other people make a big deal about Bob Lazar's name being in a phone book from the time and the location. But, yeah, his name's in there. But if they don't know how these things work and they're trying to reverse engineer them, how does he know it's a gravity propulsion system? If they can't make them work and they're trying to figure out how it works and what it does and how to turn it on, because if you listen to Bob Lazar's stories, that's kind of the situation they're in. They haven't figured out how to use them, how to turn them on, or how they work. So they're trying to reverse engineer, back engineer, as Rogan likes to say. But if they don't know how they work or how to operate them, how do they know it's a gravity propulsion system? It's always been a thing that I was curious about. So anyway, back to it.
And that they're trying to back engineer them. They don't know how to do it, so they keep bringing in new propulsion experts. So he was a guy that had previously worked at Los Alamos Labs, and then he gets a job. And they're essentially throwing as much shit against the wall as possible, trying to see.
Now we're going to talk about a little bit later, as soon as we're done here, about Bob Lazar working at Los Alamos, because he did. But he wasn't a scientist, and he wasn't employed by the University of California or Los Alamos Laboratories. He was employed by a subcontractor, and I'm going to show you where you can go find all of that information later when we're done. So let's just let Joe keep going.
What sticks? Like, can you figure this out? And they're bringing in new people. And he was brought in apparently allegedly after an accident where they tried to cut into the reactor and it exploded and people died. And so they said, okay, well, that's not going to work. Let's try another method, bring in some other people. And he was one of the people they brought in. And when you have top secret clearance, what happens is they tap all your phones. They listen to you all the time. Well, he had this job where he couldn't tell his wife what he was doing. So he would get this phone call saying that he has to fly out to Area 51 at like 11 p.m. So he would go to the airport, fly out. His wife was like, this motherfucker's cheating on me. So she starts fucking her.
They don't tap all your phones and do all that stuff when you have a top secret clearance. I'm sorry, but they don't. They're going to monitor some of your activity, sure, but they're not going to listen in on all of your phone calls. Not when you're at home. They'll listen to your phone calls. Should I tell you a funny story? I can tell you a funny story, but anyway, there are certain things you're not allowed to talk about on the telephone. And sometimes those things happen. And sometimes phones will just go dead if you're saying the wrong things. I'll just tell you. I had a situation back in the 80s when I was overseas. And without thinking, somebody asked me a question. It was one of my family members from back home asked me a question, and I just started talking. I was completely just off in my own little world. I didn't think about the ramifications of what they had asked. And so as I'm talking, the phone just goes dead. And it was just, they disconnected me because they were trying to prevent me from revealing anything classified. I guess they thought I was getting a little too talkative. So they just disconnected the phone call, and it wasn't uncommon for that to happen. So your counterintelligence people, they did listen to phone calls and things like that. But not at your house. They're not going to go to your house and bug your home phone unless they suspect you of, revealing classified information and things like that. But typically, it doesn't involve anything in your house.
Her flight instructor. She's got some flight instructor.
So anyway, he's talking about
his
how
wife
his
was
wife
having an affair.
ran off on him.
I was like, this is what I was doing. I was working on these fucking UFOs. They have actual UFO. That's the one. That thing on the desk right there, that's the recreation of what he called the sport model that they worked on that has this flying saucer that's behind the antlers.
That's like the three.
The classic.
It's like the Tesla 3.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
If you were to...
Yeah, the classic.
The peppy little...
The sport model.
Got it.
So he brings people out to watch. He said on Wednesday they have these flights and they test these things.
Yeah.
I'll take you guys out to the desert.
And this actually did
He took
happen,
them
by
out
the
the
way,
desert.
so-
He takes them
so
a
they
couple
did. He
times,
took
then he
some
gets
friends out
arrested.
there.
So he gets arrested and he
But
says,
he didn't
they're going to
get-
fucking kill me.
They
I
didn't.
have to.
No. Now, I don't know where he's getting this, but he might be trying to fill in some blanks or whatever. But anyway, yeah, that wasn't part of the original story. So unless Bob has changed his story over the years, who knows? Maybe he has. But a lot of this stuff is just nonsense. And Bob Lazar's story has changed multiple times over the years, the details of which the core of the story is the same as it always has been. He was employed as a physicist to attempt to reverse engineer these propulsion systems on these alien spaceships, and there were 9 hangars that were embedded in the side of the mountain and all these other things, and some of them, or at least one, I forget all the details of his story, even though I've listened to it multiple times now. At least one of them he believed was from an archaeological dig, where they dug it up out of the ground, that it had been here for a long, long time. But anyway, the gist of the story is that, and it's been promoted by George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell and endless other people over the decades since 1989. And when people start digging into it, they're like, well, we don't even have any proof that he worked out there or anything. Well, there is proof that he worked out there, because his name is in a phone book. And you're going to hear, if you listen to Jeremy Corbell talk about him all the time, you're going to hear Corbell say, we've got the phone book entry with his name on it. It's obviously proven that he worked out there. Well, there's someone else you need to go check out a little bit. Now, let's see if I can actually get them up here. There is a Medium page. Let's see if this is showing up. Yes. And the title of it is Bob Lazar, There's More to the Story. And Signals Intelligence. This page, actually on this Medium, there are several. I think it's 3. I think they turned this Bob Lazar thing into a 3-part series. But this person probably did the deepest dive into Bob Lazar of anybody over the decades. So, and I followed this story since 1989 or so. But this person has done the deepest dive on who Bob Lazar actually is, the truth of what he was doing, his background, his history, his education, all of those things, his lies that he's put out there over the decades. Stanton Friedman, who was a nuclear physicist back in the day, he has passed away, so rest in peace, Stanton. Dr. Stanton Friedman, Ph.D., who was an actual nuclear physicist. He worked on rockets and things like that, but he didn't like Bob Lazar at all, and he was one of the first people to actually start investigating Bob Lazar's educational claims, and figured out that Bob did not actually have these advanced degrees from MIT and Caltech and all these other places that he claimed to. And then, of course, in response, and this is what all of these liars and con artists do, he'll say, oh, my records were destroyed in a fire, or they intentionally are hiding my records because they don't want the truth to be known. The same story from all of them. But you can go down through this entire story, and yes, there's an entry. He shows it. There's Bob Lazar. Let's make sure it's visible again. Bob Lazar, right there in the middle of the page. Lazar Robert 7-6735. That would be his extension number, I'm assuming. KM. That stands for Kirk Meyer. He was a contractor with Kirk Meyer. He was not a physicist. He wasn't a scientist at all. And this article here on Medium goes through interviews. This guy interviewed dozens of people who were actually around back then, who remembered Bob Lazar, and he was able to find them and get several of them to sit down for interviews. And I'm assuming a lot of this was over the phone, but he's interviewed all these people and he's put them together in these articles, and he will tell you all about it. And yes, Bob Lazar was in that phone book, but that's because he was a contractor with Kirk Meyer, and he was like, I don't know, the different stories have been told about what he did when he was out there, as far as like he repaired some machines to keep them working. Some people said that he was checking the rad meters on the scientists' coats to make sure they haven't been exposed to too much radiation and that sort of stuff. Yeah, it could have been any number of things, but where he worked is true. Well, it probably wasn't, maybe or may not have been called S4, but what he was doing out there was anything but being a scientist and working on alien spaceships. But I would recommend going there and going to Medium and reading that stuff. You can start there. Just do a search for that title, and it's Bob Lazar, There's More to the Story. And you'll find that. And down at the bottom of that article, you're going to find a couple of more articles about Bob Lazar. And so it's like I guess there's a 4-part series on Bob Lazar. One's called Believing Bob Lazar, Part 2. I don't know where Part 1 is. But so maybe there's a 5-part series. It's a series. The guy wrote quite a bit about Bob Lazar. So go check that out. And I don't know who that person is. I really don't. But it's really exceptional work. And so I applaud that. And I will encourage everybody to go read their stuff. So then Joe Rogan, of course, just keeps pushing Bob Lazar on everybody who comes on his show who expresses any kind of an interest in discussing UFOs. And I don't understand it. For a guy who likes to qualify his statements by saying, well, you don't know what's real and what's not, so I don't know if the guy's lying, but he sure is promoting this constantly. And he does admit that it's his most successful episode, I guess it is. And I think it was, it's highlighted down there, the Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell down in the lower left-hand corner. That was the episode that he's talking about. And that apparently was his most successful episode of the podcast so far, which I guess is interesting because you have a guy who's kind of new to the UFO scene, this Jeremy Corbell, who we've talked about before. The guy's just a loon, and he just makes up a lot of shit. And then you have Bob Lazar, who is also a loon and makes up a lot of shit. But what you're going to find when you go looking into other things is that Bob Lazar is a criminal. So when he was supposedly out there, working to reverse engineer alien spaceships, he was involved in a lot of things. But they talk about a raid. His house was raided, and the FBI came to his house and searched it, and all these other things. It was very traumatic for him and his family and all of that. It had nothing to do with aliens. It had to do with they were searching for some issues that were happening on the internet, where he was selling chemicals over the internet, and he wound up pleading guilty to that charge. And of course, that's unrelated to the charge from years before of 1990, I believe it was. In 1989, he was talking to George Knapp, and in 1990, he was arrested for running a brothel. So, an illegal brothel at that. So, not really a reputable character, and has been caught lying many, many, many times. So if you're going to get into the UFO lore stuff, you're going to have to understand who Bob Lazar is. You're going to have to understand his story, but you're also going to have to understand that he was completely and utterly full of shit. And it's been proven repeatedly over the decades. So when you have people like George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell pushing Bob Lazar on people, it worked on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is very, very gullible. Say what you want about Joe Rogan. He's not a smart man. I'm sure he would be the first one to, let you know that. I don't think he thinks of himself as any kind of a super genius or anything. He's not a smart guy. He made some very good decisions. He became very popular and was able to monetize that popularity. And he's been hugely successful doing what he's doing, running a comedy club now and stuff. So absolutely no issues with Joe Rogan. I think he does a great job of doing color commentary on UFC fights and stuff, and he really has a kind of an encyclopedic knowledge of martial arts and their application in real world sporting events like the UFC and just regular mixed martial arts from all around the world. So he really is sort of an authority on those things. He's also dumb, and he's very gullible. So he falls for a whole lot of things. And if you challenge his belief system, he will just come at you really hard. And he's done that a couple of times with some of his guests, where what they're telling him doesn't comport with what he wants to believe. So he just constantly attacks them and creates like this hostile environment for them during the podcast. And it's kind of really weird for someone who's supposed to be, neutral, and he's trying to get these people to explain things to the world. He doesn't really come across that way a lot of times. So I'm sorry, I'm looking around for those of you watching. I've got to check and make sure everything is still recording, because occasionally you still have some issues with that stuff. But that's been going on. And I don't know. I'm sorry, Joe, but I'm just not. I can't do it. But also, what we've also been having going on is, well, President Trump. And holy shit, the whole Doge thing and Trump and pretty much, I don't know how many nominees for his cabinet positions are still yet to be confirmed. Kash Patel got confirmed last week, and they also made him the interim head of the ATF, which is actually the BATFE now. It hasn't been called the ATF in decades, literal decades. So sorry, all you people out there who like to talk about it. The ATF hasn't been called the ATF in a very long time. It's now the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. BATFE. Yeah, BATFE. So they took the FBI director, and now they've also made him the interim director of the ATF. I don't know if they plan to permanently replace him or if they're just going to let Kash Patel run both of them, which is kind of ridiculous. I don't think they'll get away with that for very long, but I also don't expect Kash Patel to be very good at any of it. They keep firing everybody who knows how to do these things. They've gotten rid of pretty much everybody who runs these departments. And so it's going to be a literal shit show and a circus for quite some time. They have reduced staffing by huge amounts in some of these cases. And in some cases, they fired people they had to bring back because they shouldn't have fired them in the first place, because they're the only people who know how to do this certain things. So especially nuclear regulatory people who were let go because, we don't know what they do, so let's just fire them all. And, they are the ones who kept track of our nuclear stuff. So it was kind of important. And you can't just we'll train up some interns to do that. No, you can't. They got rid of a lot of probationary employees in a lot of these departments, and some people would be like, those new hires. Well, in a lot of these jobs, your probationary period can last 18 or 24 months. So it doesn't mean that you were just recently hired. You could already be settled in and hopeful that this is going to be your long-term career. But the thing with probationary employees in these types of departments is pretty much that these are the people who are supposed to replace the people above them as they retire or quit or move on to other departments. Just this normal attrition that's going to happen. The probationary employees coming in from the bottom who are going to become a part of the department as their career grows, they move up the ladder and replace those people who are retiring or leaving or getting fired or whatever. So if you get rid of all the probationary employees, you don't have anyone to replace these people now. And so if a whole bunch of them say, screw you, we don't want to work here anymore because Elon Musk is an absolute retard, then you're screwed, because you don't have anybody to replace them now, because those people who are being trained to replace them aren't there anymore. So really what you should have done is cleaned off the top layer and let everybody else move up. But if you take out the bottom layer, you have no one to fill the gaps when those gaps appear. And then you've created gaps. So you've just designed your own disaster for a department. And it's increasingly obvious that none of these people have any idea what they're doing. They don't know how to run anything in government. And to Trump's credit, I think that's what his plan was, to bring in people who are not lifelong government employees, who have never been in these senior positions before. They've never run these things. So they're going to bring a fresh perspective to whatever it is that they're doing. You can admire that. You can say that's a good idea. We could get a fresh pair of eyes on this or on that. But he's bringing in completely inexperienced people to do a lot of very important jobs. And I don't know, it's not going very well. And we're kind of becoming, I wouldn't even say a laughing stock in a lot of the world. We are becoming an adversary. The President of the United States, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and others are going around the world bad-mouthing our allies and promoting our adversaries, which is weird. I'm in my 57 years. I don't know if I've ever seen a president of the country do that. I don't think I've ever seen a vice president or a secretary of state or a secretary of defense. All of these people are doing that and siding with Russia over Ukraine, saying that Ukraine's going to need to make some concessions to Russia and blah, blah, blah. Russia invaded them. Why would they give them anything? Russia should be giving them back Crimea because Russia invaded Ukraine 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, and stole Ukrainian territory. And so if there are going to be any concessions, it should be that Russia is going to give all of that back and go back to their normal borders. But for some reason, our president, vice president, and various other cabinet members have decided that they're going to support Russia in this and screw Ukraine. Some of the things that are being said are absolutely ludicrous. They're nothing but ridiculous conspiracy theories that people have been reading on the internet. And so what you have is this core group of lunatics, these conspiracy theorists who really are what brought Trump to power in the first place. These QAnon nut jobs, these conspiracy theorist nut jobs, the Christian nationalists, those kind of people, the ones who are crazy and probably not very smart, are the ones who got Trump elected in the first place. And he panders to them every now and then. He'll bring up one of those conspiracy theories that they really like, and he'll talk about, something's going to have to happen with that. Well, we're going to look into that, and all this other stuff. They're even going to go count the gold at Fort Knox because now there's a conspiracy theory that's always been out there for a long, long time that Fort Knox is actually empty. That we already spent all that gold. Gold isn't the backer of our denominations. It's not our money anymore. We're not on the gold standard anymore. So the amount of gold that's in Fort Knox is really kind of irrelevant. It's like this is our nation's wealth, and we're going to put some aside, for a rainy day. I don't know. I have no idea. But our money isn't backed by gold anymore. So I'm not really sure even why it's important. If they had that much gold, hey, you could just sell it, maybe pay off some of the national debt that you guys have incurred over the last 30 years. All that 30 some odd trillion dollars worth. But they're doing that. They're going to start bringing up the whole vaccine thing again, which is even doubly stupid because Trump was the one who did that Project Warp Speed or, Operation Warp Speed, where he got these vaccines pushed and approved more quickly than normal because they needed these vaccines out there. Now he's just like, these vaccines are bad and we're going to take away funding for anyone who mandated them. And we put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in charge of the health department thing. So he obviously doesn't give two shits about your health if he's going to put that guy in charge. But there's been a lot going on, and there has been there was a flurry of executive orders in the first couple of days. I mean, immediately following the inauguration, he was in there signing stacks and stacks and stacks of executive orders, things that he didn't even know what they were. He was just signing things. And there, a guy would have to tell the press, this is what this is for. And they signed a whole bunch of things that aren't necessary at all. But the other day he signed one saying that only the president and the attorney general can decide what the law is. And what? There has been a lot of talk in this administration from the president, from the vice president, from the attorney general, from the White House counsel, talking about how the judicial branch can't prevent the executive branch from doing anything. The executive branch is in charge, and the judicial branch has no power to tell them they can't do anything. And I'm sorry, but Pam Bondi and J.D. Vance are both attorneys. Donald Trump has known a lot of attorneys, and you're talking about the White House counsel. I don't know about how many of the other guys are actually attorneys, but every attorney on earth knows that that isn't true. The judicial branch absolutely has power to stop the executive branch from doing things. That's the law. And if you're breaking the law, it doesn't matter if you're a part of the executive branch or if you're Joe Schmo down at the barbershop. You can't do it because it's against the law. And I suspect, just based on what little, honestly, I've paid attention, because it just makes me really batshit crazy. But there's a lot that's going on right now that is going to be found to be illegal. And that's going to have to get reconciled at some point, because whether or not that results in people being, I'm not talking about rounding people up and put them in Gitmo like we're doing with illegal aliens right now. I'm talking about more like there's going to be, some hands slapped and saying, no, sorry, I know you signed this executive order, but that's illegal. Can't do it. So it's now null and void. And it may take a while for some of those things to happen. But the president is also trying to force people to do what he wants by threatening them, by threatening to, withhold aid and things like that, withhold federal funding for different things. They're canceling all sorts of programs. But there was an interesting encounter the other day, and I'm going to pull this up because we're just going to listen to it. This is a very shortened version of it, and I don't know how this is going to turn out for those of you watching on video. It's a really tight shot of the president. I'm sure it wasn't this way in the beginning, but let's give a listen to what he had to say.
CAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor?
I'm not sure what he's talking about right now, but...
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
He asked her, because he's talking to Governor Janet Mills from Maine, and he asks her if she's going to comply with it, if Maine is going to comply with it. And she responds, we're going to comply with state and federal law. That's what we're going to do. And he had this to say.
Well, we are the federal law.
No, you're not. You're not the federal law, you fucking moron. You're the president. You don't make laws. You can sign them, but Congress is the one that makes the laws. The judiciary is the one that approves the laws and says they're constitutional or not. You just sign them. That's all you do. You are not the law. You think you're fucking Judge Dredd or something. I am the law. It's really fucking... Wait a minute. I am the law. That's what he's trying to do. Anyway, no, you're not. You are not the law. But this is what he has to say about it.
We are the federal law.
You see, he said I. He was starting to say I. He was going to say I am the federal law, but then he decided to change it to we, because that would sound better if he just said we instead of saying I. So,
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do
He
it.
was
You better
going to
do it
say,
because you're not
I
going to get
am
any federal
the
funding
law.
at all if you don't. And
So
by the way, your
now,
population
here we go.
federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Well, isn't that interesting? That this is what the president says to people. He's threatening this governor.
Just found this unbelievable
Wow.
sequin dress
Okay.
on eBay.
Sorry,
The seller was probably
it's
a Vegas
playing
showgirl.
ads now. I think I can actually just close that. Sorry for that. Unless you're, looking for some skirts and stuff, you can go on there, follow whatever that was. But yeah, no, the president is not the law. The president does not determine what the law is, and he's literally threatening a governor. Now, granted, I don't know. Maybe he has the power to take away federal funding for different things in their state. I don't know. Maybe he does. Who knows? But a governor of a state is not beholden to the President of the United States. That's why we're called the United States, and we're not called something else. There's a governor in each state, and they are in charge. The end. The federal government can do things federally that affect the nation and affect things nationwide, but you don't get to run a state. That's not the way our republic was set up. And for those of you who are like, for the last 30 years, because someone you didn't like was in charge, have been saying, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Well, now here's your republic in action. So what are you going to do? That governor doesn't have to listen to that president at all. And I'm sorry if you're hearing the dog barking in the background. Obviously, there's ninjas or something breaking into the house, and my dog it's on it. It's going to take him out. But no, the governor could have said, hey, guess what? Fuck off. Because she doesn't have to listen to what the president says. It's her state. She runs it. Her constituents are the people of her state. They elect her. Just like Trump and Vance and Bondi and all these other people keep talking about this mandate. There's this election mandate. The people of the United States elected President Trump, and therefore they voted for a mandate. It's a mandate that he get what he wants done. Well, the people of the state of Maine elected her. So it's the same thing. She doesn't have to listen to you. You can take away federal funding, I'm sure. There might be some other things you can do, some harassment that you may be able to do. And I'm sure you can have her audited by the IRS unless there's no one left working there. But yeah, no, a governor of a state doesn't have to listen to you. They don't have to, bow down like the rest of the Republican Party has, like these sycophants who you've placed in these different positions, a lot of whom hated your guts just a few short years ago, who all of a sudden no one will criticize you. And it's amazing, all this, people are lavishing you with praise and worship all the time. Every time somebody gets up and says something in front of you, they have to do this 20-minute preamble about how much of an amazing leader you are and how, oh my God, we should be naming streets after you and put you on Mount Rushmore. It's fucking retarded. It's really, really stupid. And I don't know how long it's going to go on, but it's not good for our country, and it's not good for our relationships around the world. None of it is good. And it's kind of embarrassing. But one thing that we heard repeatedly during, Obama and during Biden, and even during the Trump years when he was trying to weed out the deep state, people were reminded to remember your oath. Remember your oath. And, nobody did. And nobody's saying it anymore, because if people were going to remember their oath and actually abide by the oath that they took when they gained their positions, nobody would be doing what they were doing right now. Because they took an oath to the Constitution, not to a person. It's to the Constitution. The military takes an oath to the Constitution. Elected officials take an oath to the Constitution. So, the Constitution is kind of the number one thing in our country. If something is going to be admired and worshipped and held up as an example of what we aspire to, it's supposed to be the Constitution, not Donald Trump. Now, that doesn't mean that everything Donald Trump is going to do is going to be bad. Just like the last time he was president, not everything he did was bad. He didn't do a whole lot. He didn't get a lot accomplished. And it's kind of funny because there's a young generation of people who just listen to the news or listen to podcasts, and they have no idea what's going on. So I had a young person telling me the other day that, yeah, but when Trump was president, he didn't have a majority in the House or the Senate. Or yes, he did. For the first 2 years he was president, he controlled everything. Just like he doesn't really now, I guess. I guess he does now, but for some reason, they've been told that that's not the way things were when he got elected the first time. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I'm sure people are trying to make an excuse because there's a whole lot of things he's promising to do now that he promised to do last time, but didn't. So here we are, back in the same old boat. He could have done it last time. Probably would have gone a lot smoother. But I have friends overseas. I have friends in Europe and other parts of the world, and they are scared for us, to be honest. They have decided that the United States is no longer going to be their ally, that they can no longer rely on the United States. They don't believe that the United States would come to their aid in the event of another world war. They don't believe that if Russia invaded Western Europe right now, America would come and help them. They don't believe it. And that's because of the things that have been going on so far, with Trump accusing basically our allies of mistreating us, and accusing other allies of ours of being the bad guys, and letting Russia be the good guy. We're going to let them win that war. They fought for that territory. We should let them keep it. Well, the territory belonged to Ukraine. We wouldn't do that. And for all these people who are like, Ukraine needs to stop the war, Ukraine didn't start the war, and Ukraine can't stop the war. They're defending themselves against an invasion. They can't just wake up one morning and say, okay, the war's over. No. If they do that, they no longer have a country. So I don't know where people get these weird ideas that Ukraine has any control over the end of that war. For them to end the war, Ukraine has to surrender and just let Russia have it. And that's not going to happen. Just like it wouldn't happen here or anywhere else. I don't know. It's just the way humans are, I guess. But yeah, my friends in Europe, they're not optimistic about how things are going here. And they're starting to decide on their own that Europe is going to need its own sort of army thing, like NATO, but without the United States, because they no longer believe that the United States is their ally and friend, which is a shift, and a shift away from, 100 years of, the way things have been since, I guess, World War I, which was more than 100 years ago. It's crazy. It's crazy what's happening. So keep your powder dry and, eat your Wheaties. Stay strong, exercise, eat right, take your medicine, because Lord only knows what's going to happen around here. But that's what was happening this week. That's what's been on my mind this week. I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me. I don't care. So enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Really? Just Stop. with your host, Ross. Make sure to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss a dose of some common sense.